Today we're going to be talking with Cara Black, who is a New York Times best-selling author. Her 17th book has just come out, and it's called Murder in Saint-Germain. Welcome, Cara.
Hi, Libby.
She's published by Soho Books, and the hardcover, which we have here, is $27.95. So if you're in the mood to take a virtual trip to Paris, I suggest that you push your button right underneath the screen that you're watching this on and buy it. And Cara will be more than happy to sign it before it gets sent out to you. We also welcome questions. So if you have a question you'd like to ask Cara, do push the submit button after you've typed your question underneath the screen. So now, without further ado, hi, Cara.
Hi, Libby. Nice to see you. Nice to be here.
It's been so long. Tell us about Aimée Leduc and Murder in Saint-Germain.
So Aimée Leduc is my private detective. She's half French, half American. She's taller and thinner than I am, and she lives on the Ile Saint-Louis because that's where I would like to live. She's inherited a private detective agency from her father and has run it, and when he was murdered in this mysterious explosion, she decided to take it over and turn to computer security. So she doesn't want to do criminal, but she is trained.
So is it a contemporary series? Or?
Well, sort of. We're in the 1990s. The first book is 1993. Now in the new book, we're in July 1999. But with the caveat that there's no Facebook, there's no Twitter, Google was on the horizon, you could smoke in the cafes. Jacques Chirac was president doing all the things he was later almost indicted for. And they were paying in francs, not euros. It's a bit of a pastime, but you know, they have cell phones, they can hack computers. So it's kind of a near past.
Why did you set it in the near past as opposed to contemporary?
Well, I started writing in 1993. I had a story I wanted to tell about my friend's mother, a hidden Jewish girl, in the Marais during the wartime, that German occupation. But I wanted to also, I was going to France a lot in the 90s. I wanted to talk about contemporary France, you know, the women I knew, my friends. And so I was thinking how to put that together. And my dad was a mystery reader, and he was like, you could frame it in a mystery, and you could talk about the past that impacted the present day, which was the 90s. So I wrote it. It wasn't published till 1999, and it wasn't so very old then. And my editor said, "Well, where is Aimée Leduc going after this story?" And I said, "What?" And she said, "Yeah, you know her dog and the man she met, and you are writing a series, aren't you?" And I lied and said, "Of course I am."
Right.
So. Right. That got me into my life of crime. I just moved her incrementally, you know, every few months, every season. So now, 17 books later, we're in July 1999.
I want to talk about the book, but tell me about the arrondissements. And you've written 17 books, and Paris has 20 arrondissements. What are arrondissements for people who don't know?
Sure. They're districts of Paris, sections. I mean, I live in San Francisco, so I live in Noe Valley, but there's the Mission, there's downtown, you have the Loop and all these. So the first arrondissement in Paris started out on the Ile de la Cité with Notre Dame, and then it expanded, and each king built a wall, and the next king knocked it down, and Paris became what we know with the 20 arrondissements, 20 districts on left and right bank. And each one has because they were villages at one time, and they specialized, like, you know, whether in timber or furniture making or the leather business, they had a distinct flavor. And that still remains, even though Paris, you can always find a cafe and, you know, everywhere and sit outside and have wine. But it's really, there's a special flavor, and I like to talk about that.
So this is set in which arrondissement?
It's in the 6th arrondissement, on Saint-Germain-des-Prés, on the left bank, and a lot of people know it. A lot of people go there. They go to that Café Flore.
Is that where the Sorbonne is?
No, that's in the 5th. I've already killed people there. Yes, that's Murder in the Latin Quarter. That's right next door, though, adjacent. This one is, maybe you know because people know, because the École des Beaux-Arts is there. where Picasso painted Guernica in his atelier. It's those famous Boulevard Saint-Germain with Café Flore, Café de Magot. Sartre and de Beauvoir sat there, Albert Camus, Hemingway, you know, Jardin de Luxembourg. It's a place you probably know if you've been to Paris. You go there because there is a wonderful feeling of writers and painters, even though it may be from a while ago.
So what happens in the story?
Oh, a lot happens in this story. So Aimée Leduc is now a single mother. She has an 8-month-old daughter, Chloe. She's juggling a lot. She has the private detective business to run, which is computer security. She has troubles in her sort of relationship, and she is doing a actually cushy job at École des Beaux-Arts, doing their computer security. And as she leaves one day, it's raining, and she takes shelter. She starts to go in the street, and a familiar face peeps out from a cafe. And it's Suzanne Lesage, who is a top cop. She's in a very elite squad, very well-trained policewoman. Well, she's more than a policewoman.
Sort of like a SWAT team member or something? Or?
Not so military, but yeah, she's more of an undercover counterterrorism, and often in, you know, plain clothes. And Aimée has done a favor for Aimée a few books ago. And so she peers out of the cafe and says, "Hey, how about a coffee?" And Aimée has a big dread in the pit of her stomach. What is, you know, she goes, "You owe me. Now I need you to repay." So what Suzanne asks disturbs Aimée, because Suzanne, who's very professional, really well respected, reveals that she has been on secondment to The Hague for the ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. She was working with a multinational force going to find Serbian warlords who were involved in the Balkan conflict, who were there and hiding in plain sight. She reveals that the man who they had the sealed indictment for, she saw killed in a tunnel near Foca, and he was responsible for incredible atrocities. Yet the night before, she went to her cafe in Saint-Germain to buy her lotto ticket, as she did every Monday night before she went home to her children, and she saw him. She saw a ghost. And she's convinced he's in Paris. And Aimée is feeling, how could that be? And she said, "My boss thinks I'm crazy. They might put me, you know, in the hospital for psychiatric, and I need you to find him if he exists." And Aimée is bound, you know, by her promise to repay her, but she also feels maybe Suzanne is traumatized, and maybe if she helps her too, she'll be able to prove this is just someone she thought she saw. So that's where we kind of start.
Okay.
But Aimée has to pay back, and her babysitter's going on vacation, and you know, life is always bubbling up.
So what I find why I love your books is you always deal with a social issue or a historical issue or something that is beyond just the crime that's committed. Where did that come from?
This story, it was very different from many of my stories. I met a woman who was very similar to Suzanne maybe 4 books ago when I was in Paris. She was a top cop. I interviewed her to find out what it was like to be in this top elite squad in the 80s and 90s. And we met for lunch, and I have all these questions prepared. What about the male-dominated squad, and how did you handle that? Thinking of that former show, Prime Suspect, with Jane Tennant. So thinking how it would have been hard for a woman in the 80s and 90s. And she said, "Oh, no problem." I got along with them great. And I thought, wow, she must have been good. And then I thought, there went all my questions. And then I said, well, my brilliant question, where do you buy guns in Paris, Catherine? Because it's not like our country where you can order them. She goes, she took out a map, and she was like, well, it's in the suburbs, and you can get Uzis here and Kalashnikovs there. And I'm like, good to know. But how do you know that? And she said, well, a lot of the arms came from the former Soviet Union when it broke apart, from the Balkans, and that's where you go. And then she told me about being seconded to The Hague and about her experiences, which were very different. She did several tours of duty. So, and I remember that. So a couple of books later, I was looking at my notes, and I was thinking, that's fascinating. Maybe I could explore that more and maybe write about that. And I got in touch with her, and I said, Catherine, can we talk more about this? Can we go to lunch? And she said, you know, Cara, I think I've told you everything I wanted to tell you. I think I don't want to go there anymore. I was traumatized. It's kind of, and I went, great, selfishly, there goes that book. But I thought about her, and I thought about what Michael Connelly says, that I've heard him say in like an event, or he said, a lot of people like to read how the cops work on a crime, right? Mm-hmm. But I like to read how the crime works on the cop. So, you know, more character driven. And I thought, here she was, such a top cop, elite squad. You know, what was it like for her? I mean, this was her profession. She was really good at it, but she was traumatized. Mm-hmm. So I thought it'd be interesting to explore through the character of Suzanne what that was like. People think you're crazy. Are you seeing things or not? And then there are other characters who were part of her team who die in accidental circumstances, and especially one who was really interesting to write, and what it was for him, because he was military and that was his life, and he lost his leg, and so I just wanted to explore that.
But you deal with political issues in almost all your books. Why is that?
Everything is politics. Art is politics. Mm-hmm. That's what French people told me. It's all politics. And I'm like, okay, even art, yes. And I think it's fascinating because of the time that I write in the 90s. This was happening. You know, the Dayton Accord had happened a few years before, but things were still happening. So I think to paint a real, true reflection of the 90s, I need to write about what was in the front page, you know, what people were talking about, who was running for this, what scandal was happening, what demonstration, and what strike, because there's always a strike in Paris, right? And that means something to people, you know, I mean, whether the hospital workers are striking, you know, it's always in the newspaper. And I want to reflect what was happening. So if you were on the street in Aimée Leduc's high heels and you were looking around, you would feel that, you would see that in the newsstand, you would hear people talking about it. And so sometimes I touch more on politics, but I think sometimes.
Well, you did the Basques, you did Chinatown, the Marais, you did history. I mean, you've done a lot. I mean, pretty much every book has either a social or a historical component, which I love, by the way.
Thank you.
It's something I love, and I hope that our viewers love it too. Speaking of high heels, Aimée Leduc is known to be sort of a fashionista, and she goes to secondhand stores and gets the latest fashions. I'm not sure how she manages that, but where did she come from in the first place?
You mean the vintage couture that she finds?
Right, right.
Okay. Well, I knew I couldn't write as a French woman because, you know, I can't even tie my scarf the right way, and we know that's genetic. But I had a lot of friends. I went to a French Catholic school. I spoke some kind of French. And when I first went to France, I felt very familiar, yet I was also an outsider, and I'm very well aware of that. But I could understand what people were saying. I could, you know, there's different customs. They're like at the dinner table, when you pass the salt, you keep eye contact. And when I break eye contact, they go, no, you can't do that, it's bad luck. And I mean, there were all these incredible things. And I wanted to write about a woman who was very French, but also an outsider, and who better, as you know, than a detective, because they're kind of lone wolves. They're outside of society. They're doing different, you know, they're not the mold. There's no mold for them. So I thought she'd be half French, half American. She would live again in this great apartment because I would want that. And she would have this thing. I see French women on the street, and they have this carelessly, effortlessly tousled chic look, which I want to capture, but I can't do it. Yeah. And I thought she would also, and I think French women dress in a way, it's not all designer. What really well-dressed people, they pick good quality pieces. Maybe they, you know, really spend on that, but they put it together. It's how you put things together. You may have one really nice piece.
Well, talk about a little bit about where her parents and her emotional psyche.
Yeah. Her father was a French policeman, and he was thrown off the force. There was, you know, for many reasons. And her American mother left her when she was 8 years old, and was on the terrorist watch list. And they never talk about her. Her father won't have anything to do with keeping anything of hers. And so Amy's been raised by a single father. And a lot of it was, and he took over the detective agency of his father. So she was raised by men you know, a lot of French men over around the kitchen table playing poker or belote on Friday nights, and, you know, hearing the language and knowing about the network, the old boy network. So that was her background, and she never really had a female role model. And so she's always wanted family, and when her father is killed, there's this huge hole in her life, and she inherits the agency, and she's got to make it work. And her mother is always this kind of mystery. Why has her mother disappeared? Why doesn't her mother make contact? So kind of her arc, I think, as I've discovered after writing all these books, which I didn't know would be, is her looking for family, and now she has a baby. And she didn't want a baby, but it happened, and she loves it. So now I think her growth is she wants to be the mother she never had.
Excellent. We do have a question. Hi, Milo. Thanks for submitting it. He's in LA, and his question is, why did it take you so long to kill someone in the Saint-Germain district? It seems like such a great place for a mystery.
You're right, Milo. It is wonderful, and you're not the only person who's asked. I was intimidated, you know, because again, I write more about off the beaten track Paris. You know, about there's like 4 Chinatowns in Paris, and I wrote about the smallest one. And people are like, there's 4, and so I like to find a really different, off the beaten track, not the beret and baguette stereotype. But I felt everyone knew this, you know, Saint-Germain much better than I did. It's where we all go. I mean, because, you know, and so it held me back, and I had to find a way into that story. And and it wasn't about me, it was about Aimée. What was Aimée's history there? Well, she went in the last book, or in the prequel, she went to the École de Médecins for her first year of pre-med, which is right there. She had gone every Sunday with her grandfather to the Jardin du Luxembourg, you know, which is incredible. It's a fixture of a Parisian childhood, Sunday afternoons, you know, the boats, and then the Marionette Theater, and the leafy lawns, and I felt so ripe for murder, you know. Then I went underground, the Jardin du Luxembourg, in these old German Luftwaffe bunkers, which exist and lead to the Senate. And so it was when I found my other way in, you know, a little bit off the, you know, not the most common things, then I could write about it. It took me a while, I agree.
If you had to, you're 17 books into the series now, and I assume you're going to write about the last 3.
I hope so.
If you had to do anything differently, what would you do differently, either in the series or with Aimée or in general?
I got to already do that. I already had my publisher asked me the question we all want to hear: if there's anything you can change, what would you change?
Right.
And she said it was for the first book, Murder in the Marais, and because we're doing this new edition, I said, anything I can change? On page 1, her age. I actually put in her real age at the time because I didn't know I was writing a series. And that's always haunted me because she would have been too old to have a baby, and, you know, with the clock ticking, and now we're 6 years in her life. So they took it out. And so and I said, well, French woman does not reveal her age, so fine. So nobody has ever really caught that until I did my book launch in San Francisco a few weeks ago for this. A woman came up to me and goes, Amy's too old to have that baby. And I said, kids here, and I said, wait a minute, you don't have the newest edition. I got to do my dream and change and take out her age.
That's funny. Would you write a different character? Would you write a different kind of series? Or are you happy with where you're
love
at?
writing about Aimée, and I feel we have somewhere to go, you know. I feel that something will be resolved in her life. She's going to have certain kinds of growth, especially with her godfather, Commissaire Morbier, who she's had shot, and, you know, there's a lot of guilt and anguish, and she loves him, but anyway, that's the other book. But some things have to be pulled together, I think, at the end. You know, what about her mother, who kind of makes an appearance maybe in this book? And so I think
Well, you have dealt more with the mother as the series has gone on. Well, particularly in the prequel. Tell us about the prequel. It's like number 14 or 15, but should people who have not read you start with the prequel, or should they start with Marais and know that they're going to hit a prequel somewhere along the line?
Well, that's a good question. The prequel is the book before this, Murder on the Quai. And it's set in 1989 when Aimée Leduc is a student in med school. Her father is alive.
99.
89, yes.
Oh.
89.
Oh, 89, the prequel.
The prequel.
Sorry about that.
You know, big hair, big shoulder pads, you know, that time. And so she's in medical school. Her father was so proud she's going to be a doctor, not to go into the PI business. and it's the weekend the Berlin Wall falls, November 1989. He has to go to Berlin for some job, and so a relative comes in and she gets pulled into a case. And she wants to solve it before her father comes back. And so it was so much fun to do that. It was like to go back in 1989. I remember it very well and what it would be like. She was much younger. She was more rash. She was a beginner. It was really fun to play with it.
Do you think people should read that first, or should they start with the first in the series?
I think I would suggest that you read Murder on the Quai, because if you've never met Aimée Leduc, and then you can go into Murder in the Marais. But again, and you write a series too, you know that each book has to stand alone as well. Whereas you could pick this up and get who she is and go, oh, you mean there's more? Okay, and go back. Which, you know.
So you are known for your descriptions of Paris that are really sensory. You know, the taste, the smell, as well as sight and sound. And I want to know, how do you do that? And how can I get some?
Come with me on my next research trip.
You do that so well.
Thank you, thank you. Well, I think, as I was saying before, that if you're going to, you know, I'm writing a book set in this part of Paris, it needs to reflect that part of Paris. And I want you to be on the street, in Aimée's heels, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching what she is. Because that's my job, to take you to Paris at this time, and, you know, during this season. And I really work on the sensory details. But I love that in Paris. I mean, it smells different. There's butter wafting from the boulangerie. There's high heels clicking over the the pavement and the cobblestones. You know, there's perfume, there's cigarette smoke, there's, you know, it's a very smelly city, at least then. But there's also the light. I often go to a place in the book, and I'll go there the same place, different times of day. Because I want to know in the morning when people are getting up and taking the children.
You mean when you're doing your research?
When I'm doing my research.
Yeah.
I'll go there when they're taking the kids to school, when people are going to the metro to work. Then I'll go there maybe later at lunchtime. Then I'll go late in the afternoon. Kids are coming home from school. Who's coming home for the aperitif hour in the cafe later on? I want to see how the light hits, what it looks like, the pulse of that area. And that's what I want to bring alive. And I was very, very lucky to meet one of these brigade criminels, an elite cop, who said, you know, Cara, I tell them, I'm writing about the Six. Does anybody have experiences? He said, that was my first job. I was just out of the police academy, and my rookie job was doing the cobbles in Saint-Germain. And now he's in the murder squad. And so I kept saying, so we need to have coffee and go there, right? He kept saying, later, later. I kept texting him, because that's kind of what I do. I badger those guys. And I kept saying, can we do? He goes, I have a murder to solve. And I went, can you hurry up?
Now, are you conducting most of your interviews in English or in French?
A lot of them are in French.
Yeah.
Because they only want to speak French, and, you know, and again, Parisian argot is very different. It's very fast, very like bullets. There's a lot of slang. And I take notes, and I tape record them, record them. And then I'll say, you know, parlez lentement, s'il vous plaît, you know, please speak slowly, or I'll ask people later, he said this word, what does it mean? And they pun, so many punning, so, you know, that's really beyond my level. Yeah. So it's, you know, sometimes they'll only speak in French, but we're not talking art and philosophy, you know, we're talking about crime. And so he finally took me around, spent a couple of hours with me, and we walked the beat where he did. And he told me how they used to do so much community policing and where the commissariat was. And he talked about how he went into the commissariat every day, and it was a beautiful apartment building, and a very nice man walked back and forth and would say hello to him. And finally he said to one of his colleagues, who is he? He's so nice. Ah, it's Marcel Carnet, the director of Les Enfants du Paradis, the famous classic French movie, and many others. But he lived right there, and he was walking by. He also showed me where he was called as a beat cop. He was not an investigator, to secure a scene, because they had calls from the neighbors in an apartment building of a terrible smell. And they thought it was an older resident, so they went in, and he went into the room, and there was an older man who died, and had been dead for a while. And it was very, you know, poor, and he had a hot plate and clothes all over. And he thought, wow, sad for this man to die alone, you know. And he was he was securing the scene, and then he said, I remembered what they said in the police academy, always look up. He looked up, and on the wall was a Gauguin painting, an original.
Wow.
Next to it, a Matisse, and he goes, those were real paintings.
So,
Yet this man died in poverty and alone.
well, he didn't die in poverty. I mean,
He never sold them.
oh, wow.
I mean, who knows what the story was, but he was not living well.
Yeah, well, we're coming sort of to the end, but let's back up just for a second and talk a little bit about Cara Black. How did you become a writer in the first place? I mean, you were teaching nursery school, weren't you?
Mm-hmm. Preschool teacher.
Okay. How did that evolution occur?
Well, I mean, I grew up in a family of readers, and my dad was a huge reader, and then later a mystery reader. I mean, we always read, and I don't know. My uncle lived with us for a while after, when I was growing up, and he had lived in Paris after World War II and gone to art school on the GI Bill. But he just drank a lot of red wine, I think. But he had all these stories of the Paris in the 50s, and my dad sent me to the French Catholic school, and then when I was a preschool teacher, I had a son who was the same age as your daughter. And I was staying home, and we went to France to do a homestay. I mean, we did a house exchange. We had one night in Paris, and I remember I went back to the Marais, where I had heard the story of my friend's mother, who was a hidden Jewish girl, 14 years old, wore a yellow star, came home to the apartment, it was empty, and found out later her parents went to Auschwitz. Well, when I went, and I'd heard that story years before, when I went back this time, what really hit me was that, what if I had a young son, 1942? What would I have done to put food on his plate? What would I have done for us to survive? And so this was 50 years after the war. And when I came home, I said to my dad, he said, you're always talking about that. You need to write it down. You need to find a way to tell that story. And because I was at home, I started to take a writing class. Mm-hmm. And I took a writing class at UC Berkeley Extension, got into a critique group, and it took me 3.5 years to write that story. And I mean, I was still sub-teaching when my son got older, but it was always when he got into preschool, I really, that's kind of like I flourished. I could write more and take classes. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my life of crime.
Okay. We are coming to the end of our time with Cara today, but I would like to remind anyone who's watching to please order her book. She would be very happy to sign it before it goes out to you. And we want to thank Soho Press for making Cara available to us today.